Maha, do you want to start?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Maha Bali from the American University in Cairo, and with me, Daniela and Nicola. Daniela, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Daniela. I'm based at UCT in the Center for Innovation for Learning and Teaching. I'm an academic staff developer and very interested in blended learning or online learning course design. And I think I know everyone here. It's lovely. Nicola.
Yeah, nice to see so many familiar faces here joining us, and colleagues and online colleagues, physical colleagues. So yeah, let us know each other. But for our colleagues who may be joining online and might not know us, I'm Nicola Pallitt, and I'm in CHERTL in the EdTech team at Rhodes University. And I think, Maha, Daniela, and I have been collaborating for quite some time, and we're interested to share our thoughts and thinking with you today.
And thank you for joining us, and just letting you know this is going to be a very interactive session. So we'll ask you some questions, answer in the chat or answer on Slido. And if you feel like you want to express yourself more, feel free to raise your hand or unmute and start talking. And so our slides, I got the wrong link, but I will post the link to our slides as soon as I share them, and let you start off, Daniela.
So welcome everyone to our session on compassionate learning design. But before we start, are we using the chat, Maha, for this?
Let's use the Zoom for this one because we'll make the Slido, I mean, for the word cloud.
Okay. We have set up a Slido for this presentation. You can either go to slido.com and put the number in 3259126. Or you can use the QR code and we'll take you straight to the Slido page. And as a start, we just want to know how you're feeling today. If you're struggling with Slido, you can also just, use the chat in Zoom, but it would be great because there's some questions we'd like you to do in Slido. So just to see that it works. Oh, fantastic. I can see some of you have already joined the Slido chat. You're feeling enthusiastic and warm and calm. Oh, it's fantastic. Let's see if we get a few more. I think 2 of you are still typing. Hopeful, fantastic. Energized. Oh, sounds great. For those who have joined us in the meantime, we are on Slido, slido.com. You use the number 3259126 or the QR code to join. And you can just keep that page open because there will be a range of questions using the same Slido account. Oh, that is lovely, productive, very positive. You're feeling really well. Great to hear. Oh, there's one more. What was that? Keen.
Keen.
Yeah. Beautiful words today, and people are still typing, so maybe we should give them one more second. Happy and grateful. We can't wish for more. Maha, do you want to move to the next slide?
There's still someone typing.
Oh, what happened? What was added? 2 attacks. Okay, let's give them a chance. A lot of people are feeling energized, and one is feeling mad.
We hope today will be not meh. This session anyway.
So this was a word cloud on Slido, so you can see if people use similar words or the same words, they will be shown bigger on the screen. But just to talk you through, like the energized, just to talk you through the agenda for today, we'll briefly talk about learning design. I mean, it's nice, we know the Merge Africa audience knows what learning design is, but it's not always the case, as we have found out. So we'll talk a little bit about, the move from instructional design to learning design, but then also, the kind of critiques that have emerged recently or over the last few years around the typical instructional design or learning design models, and also what what kind of started to bother us. And then we'll talk about this idea of replacing empathy with compassion and what that does, to our practice and how we think about our practice of learning design. Both theoretically, but then also practically, we'll introduce our model that's based on participation, justice, care, and then leads to practice. So Praxis. So this is our program for today. We have a little bit more time than usual. So as Maha said, we're hoping for a lot of conversation and engagement and interaction. But to start us off, just to get a sense of who's in the room, again, using Slido, could you just let us know what your main role in education is?
I think we forgot to add like instructional designer.
I've thought about that.
Because we did this for a different audience where we didn't expect to find any. I guess if you're an instructional designer, we could say counselor or coach for this one.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
It's the closest thing.
Yeah. Advisor. Or other, I guess. So it looks like most of us work in higher education.
So what would I be? Because I'm naive. I'd be other.
Informal education sector.
Okay.
Like you do education outside of formal institution. And if someone wants to type in the chat, if that helps, you could do that as well. Because we've got quite a few others.
Yeah, I would be interested to hear what the others are. You can post that in the chat, or you can just, switch on your mic and let us know if you chose other, what other are you? Yeah, for sure. Often we cut across more than one space. That's true. Anybody who would like to say what the other is? You can post in the chat. Student and teaching assistant. Okay, that's higher education. Yeah, but it's true. You're not. We forgot that too. Thanks, Alia. So Adriano says higher education learning experience design, specializing game-based learning and interactivity. Very interesting. Thanks for sharing. I think we've met a few times recently, Adriano. Have we not met at the UP stakeholder workshop for the blended learning design master? And were you yesterday at the WITS conference? I've seen that name recently. Yes. Okay. I thought we've met 3 times in a week, I think. Thank you. So just very briefly, I mean, I know most of you are very familiar with the concepts of instructional design and learning design, but maybe just to redefine it for us, we like Renko No's definition of learning design. So the idea that we're making informed decisions for designing learning activity, and also the move from instructional design to learning design signals, a stronger focus on learner-centered design or learner experience design, as Adriano just shared with us. And the idea that we make much more pedagogically informed choices. So the idea that we think about our choices, we are more intentional about our design choices based on pedagogy, but also on our practice, experience, context. And all in all, it's about making those design decisions explicit so we can actually start talking about our beliefs, our assumptions about teaching and learning, because that's often the most difficult part, to make our beliefs and our colleagues' beliefs about teaching and learning explicit enough so that we can engage and discuss and talk about them. Because a lot of the kind of work we do as learning designers is trying to understand how people think about teaching and learning and what good teaching and learning is, and to try and engage in a conversation of how to support that kind of teaching and learning, but also sometimes we have to unlearn some of our beliefs and assumptions about teaching and learning and relearn something else. I think that's a lot of that has happened during COVID. So learning design is a way of making these design decisions and our beliefs and assumptions more explicit. And to move to the next slide. So the idea, about user-centered processes or more learner-centered processes were really supported by the increased interest in design thinking. Design thinking is kind of emerged in the design space, but more and more other disciplines have taken up ideas or models or approaches, principles of what is called the de-thinking, approaches or models to design, because they are useful in many other cases, in spaces or contexts as well. It's very much focused on the learner. So I think for us, when we first discovered learning, the D-School and their approaches, it revolutionized the way we went about learning design, because rather than starting with objectives, and curriculum, we actually started to think about the students and our learners and what their needs are, what their specific and very contextual needs are, and how we can support them in the learning. And that kind of changes the way people think about designing learning. So that has really, I would say, radically changed the way we go about designing courses. And also the idea that you can't be on your own designing a course. You need the kind of collective expertise. You need your students involved. You need all your stakeholders involved around the table in an ideal world to design a course, to understand, everybody's needs and experiences and expectations. So as course lecturer, you're not the sole expert in them anymore in how you design a course, but you bring in other expertise as well. And also this idea that there's not just one solution, but we should, again, that's something quite different or revolutionary for higher education, where we try to be perfect all the time. And as we try to find the best solution. Design thinking says there are many good solutions, and it's all about experimenting and risk-taking and trying things out. And if they don't work, we go back to the drawing board and try something else. But this idea of being a little bit more playful in our approach to design, I think that's for us, has really changed the way we engage with colleagues. And to move on, Maha. And while I think that has gone a long way to rethink the way we do learning design, coming from the traditional RD and those kind of models, I think there's also more and more, unhappiness or discontent around current instruction design or learning design models, because as much as the design school says design is messy and complex, it's still always seen in some ways as a linear process, and we know it's not linear. We know it goes back and forth, and it's frustrating and messy. And also, what's missing somehow, what's the feedback we got after a while, from our colleagues, that it feels very apolitical. It doesn't feel very critical. It doesn't feel very like context specific, or taking all the political conversations, especially, during decolonization and all the student protests, we came with our D-School process, and people were saying, but where is the criticality, And also, where is the designer in all of this? We think a lot about users and learners and other stakeholders, but we don't really think about who the designer is and their identity and their positionality and how that impacts on learning design decisions. There's nothing in the D-School process or in other instructional design process I have seen that actually shines the light back onto the designer and their, and how who they are impacts on how they design. Going to go next. So this whole idea of empathy started to sit quite uncomfortably with us. And because the idea of empathy is that you as a designer can put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And we know that has been challenged. And Brené Brown, for example, has done fantastic work around emotions and vulnerability, does say, empathy is not just walking in somebody else's shoes. It's about understanding, and we can never understand the other person's experience because we are always starting from a different point. It will never match my experiences. So it's not about saying, I understand you. It's more about saying, I will not understand you, but how can I support you anyway? Which is already, a nice move away from this idea of trying to walk in somebody else's shoe. But still, it's not enough, because you want to move to the next slide. I think what more and more people are saying, and there's this whole movement around the hybrid pedagogy. I don't know if you know that journal and the people around Jesse Stomo, and I mean, Maha knows them all very well, and the digital pedagogy lab, who have started to say, actually, we need to really situate course design in time and space, and we have to encourage our colleagues to think not just about the students and their needs, but also about the specific institutions and their missions, and how they might, either match their own beliefs or counter their own beliefs. And also the specific political and social context that surround the courses each time they teach them. And often in our conversations, we interviewed at the beginning of the year, I think 35 learning designers across the world who were, who are known for their socially just agendas or socially just orientations. And I mean, in most cases, if you see yourself as a socially just learning designer, you are going to clash with institutional values and with the institutional climate in a neoliberal capitalist society. So these kind of conversations have not traditionally been part of an instructional design or learning design process. Do you want to move on? So this is just, again, what about the designer? Who we are should become a center of attention as well. We need to think about our positionality and how it affects our design decisions. And Maha, do you want to move to the next slide? And there are quite a number of people who are starting to think that way. So we are not, while we felt, in our discomfort, we feel a lot of allies across the world who have kind of reached similar points of discontent with what's happening right now. And one of the cooperative or collaborative designers that we have drawn a lot from is Equity by Design, who kind of have combined the design thinking ideas, but they're combining it with anti-racist education. So the combination of the two actually, they believe is then what can lead to real change. So, they argue anti-racism education is fantastic and critical and political and important, but often lacks the tools to actually get things done. While design thinking has lovely processes and approaches and tools, but lacks the political or critical lens. So the two together then create something that might lead to more equity-oriented designs. And what we found really interesting about them is that I had never seen it spelled out so clearly, but what they say, if you want to move towards more equity-oriented or socially just learning designs, you have to look at the process itself and to see whether, the spaces that you create for design actually are socially just and equity-oriented. So, they say if we want to, if we believe design thinking is the right tool to use to redesign product systems, institutions to be more equitable, we also must redesign the design thinking process, mindsets, and the tools themselves to ensure that they mitigate for the causes of inequity. And that's really got us thinking about our own roles as facilitators of these processes. And the D Scholar as well has started thinking about that, and they have, they have amplified their process and have added this idea of noticing and reflecting to their design process. And noticing is all about reflecting of who we are and who is in the room and how that impacts on power and voice. And the reflection is, coming back and, excuse me, sorry. It's about, at the end of the process, starting to reflect back. And Equity by Design, you move to the next slide, Maha. And Equity by Design has taken this and has started developing principles of equity-oriented design that we found really interesting to think through. So they say, if we believe in historical context, and we do believe that all our designs are placed within an historical context. We work in South Africa, we know how the legacy of apartheid still affects all of us. And if we believe in radical inclusion, if you want more people and those who are usually not included in the design process to be seen and to be part of the design, and if we believe that the process of designing an equity-oriented product is as important as the product itself, then we need to, follow certain principles, or we need to be cognizant of certain things that are important. And one is designing at the margins. We often design where we are comfortable. So we are just in the process of starting to design a student leadership academy with students at UCT, led by students. But the first thing we do is we meet at UCT because that's the most familiar space for us. That's the most comfortable, most accessible space. But that might not mean that's the right space to design that leadership academy. And we need to have conversations about where to move the design process to, because where you design is also important, has an impact on what you design, and also the starting with self. So you start with your own positionality, and you have to ask yourself, as a white, non-South African, middle-class woman, what do I know about a leadership academy? Would I be the right person to lead this process? Or what would be my role in such a process? How would I see power? How would I step back and let other voices that are much more important in that space become more powerful? And to do that, we have to make them visible. So we have to talk about the power differentials, power dynamics that are usually in the room, and find ways of unpacking or addressing these power differentials when they show up. Because we do work, as much as we want to work differently, we do work in systems of oppression, and we have learned certain practices of oppression. And unless we intentionally design, mechanisms into the process that alert us when we fall into the usual traps, we are not going to design anything different. And the Speaking to the Future speaks exactly to that. It says we cannot rely on existing practices because the existing practices have not helped us. So if we want to change things, if we want to do things differently, we have to create new structures and new ways and new models. To move to the next screen, Maha. And this is just another, this is, I think, the last slide now, where we draw from. This is Sasha Constantia-Brock and his Design Justice Network. And they're not in learning design, but they're in the design space. And they've also started thinking about what would design look like if it was oriented versus justice. And they say very similar things, but what's jumped out for me is the idea that the designer becomes a facilitator rather than an expert. So rather than being a learning design expert who knows everything about learning theories and constructive alignment, another skill that you have to hone is, and I guess somebody like Irene would really respond to that, is you become a facilitator of difficult conversation. As a learning designer, you will enter a room and you will have to facilitate a process where you have to see the power in the room and how to handle the power in the room. So for me, those are just some of the thoughts we draw from, or some of the frameworks that think similarly to how we think at the moment. I think that takes us to, how do you want to move on? Yeah, so that takes us to a question that we have to you, because we talk a lot about we have to change things, but do we have the agency, the control to change things? So
Daniela, I want to ask a compassionate question. Do you need to take a break and drink something?
Yeah.
Would that help?
Yes,
Okay.
I think I'm done.
All right, I can talk for a little bit to help, and then Nicola can take over. All right, so let us know when you are involved yourself, whether teaching or as a learning designer or in whatever role that you're involved in education, how much agency do you have in terms of making decisions? Can you make all the decision yourself, or do you have to follow very strict guidelines, somewhere in between, something else completely?
Some really interesting conversation in the chat happening as well. Just so.
Yeah, so
And also
people
want
who
to
watch
say,
this later, go ahead.
So yeah, for people who are watching and might not have the chat, so Adriana commented that it's a long-term problem to solve as a historical culture of institutions and people is not easy to change. Problem is academics seem to want a template or a one-touch button. You know, they want the tech to be easy, or they want the, even instructional and learning designers, there are cultures where there are checklists used as part of processes. And sometimes these things require quite deep thinking and reflection that is not easily captured by a checklist. For many people engaging in things like short, courses on, aimed at professional development, how to become a better teacher or how to teach more effectively with technology, these are things that, often take a lot of time, and it is a journey. But it's about those small steps and those little things that we can do. And, with the three of us, we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. So it seems most people say I work with a team of other teachers to design our classes or lessons. And sometimes I have to follow some guidelines from the department or institution, but I have some leeway. Okay, so we've got a split here. At the moment, no one says that they're the main decision maker. And no one's reporting very strict guidelines or other, but perhaps you can expand. If you feel that none of these describe you, you can expand on this in the chat.
Okay, maybe we move on from this one.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. So the reason we asked how much agency you have and control you have over the things that you design is that our compassionate learning design model has lots of different dimensions, and one of the dimensions is participation. This goes a lot to what Daniela was talking about in the equity X by design model of designing at the margin, right? So I'm going to give the education example and then give a parenting example to sort of describe this model. So this model that you see in front of you here is based on an indigenous evaluation model by Nanwahi Pehana in New Zealand. She is Maori, and she was talking about how a lot of times when there is evaluation of things that reform that's been happening in indigenous communities, it comes from a Western perspective. And so the least agency and recognition is when something is done to indigenous people, where the Western folks come in and they do whatever they want to the indigenous people without checking in with them or involving them in any way. Now we've sort of changed the model into a learning design model where we're talking about the educator who decides and does things to learners. So for example, the designer, even as an empathetic teacher, decides that, oh, there's a pandemic, therefore my students are experiencing X, therefore I will do Y, but the learners are not involved in any way. A layer that is a little bit more recognizing the learner's agency and involving them would be to do things for them, where they ask students, for example, do you want me to do the class synchronously or asynchronously, for example, or do you want to do this reading or that reading? That's offering them choices. We give them choices for them, but the teacher is still the one who's deciding what those choices are. And then as you bring in more learner agency, one of the things, and one of the times, sometimes we stop at the with, where we say the learner and the teacher, the learners and the teacher decide together and determine what will happen. And this is a good, obviously good amount of participation, but you're still involving the teacher enough that for the most part, the learners will have a say, but they will still have a say within the sort of framework that they are used to a teacher allowing them to do. So you can go a level higher where the decisions and the determination is made by the learners and the teacher is there to facilitate. However, even then, having them do it by themselves, as long as they're doing it within a context and within the teacher, they will still be limited by what the possibilities they've been given beforehand are. And the most agency they could have is to do something as themselves with their own frameworks for what is successful and what's included and so on. And so to give a parenting example that Nicola was telling me this morning she likes, think about a child when they're very, very young and nonverbal. You make a meal and you give it to them and they don't have choice whether you give them yogurt or apples or whatever it is you give them. You just give it to them. When they're a little bit older and able to sort of say which one they want, you can give them choices. Here's yogurt, here's apple, here's a pumpkin. Choose which one you want, and they choose the one they want, and that's what they get. As they get older, they can come into the kitchen with you, right? And you can cook the meals together, and they're involved in how the meal gets cooked. But for the most part, you're still telling them what the meal is going to be and what the options are, but they're just choosing from the options that you give them. As they advance into the buy, perhaps they choose which ingredients, but they're still the ingredients in your own kitchen. And they're still the equipment in the kitchen that are already there. So they're doing what they want, but there's still limitations outside of their control. If you were to give it as, then in that case, they can actually go and buy their own ingredients in the supermarket and buy their own equipment that may not be in the house and, you know, bring a recipe that you've never seen before and come and do it. So this would be the analogy for parenting. So imagine how in your learning design experience that might look. So I'm taking a look at what folks are saying here. Talking about ideals and figuring out where we have agency within structures around us. And one of the things that we talk about in our model is sort of in a higher, if some of you are in higher education, and I'm not sure how many are, if you're in a higher education context, there's accreditation and things like that that sometimes wouldn't allow you to go all the way into the as, unless it's in like extracurricular activities that don't actually fit into the main curricula, for example. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this model before we go on? I'm not sure why the Nanwahid Bahana reference isn't clear on the slide. Maybe it's going to appear on another slide, but it's in our paper. We're going to give you a link to our paper. All right. What are some words you associate with compassion? And also you can tell us in the chat if you like. We don't have to use Slido for this one. How about I stop sharing and ask you to give us in the chat, what are some words you associate with compassion? Type in the question as well. Listening. Yes, Tracy. What else? Someone typed into the Slido, I care. And Vicky's saying caring at the same time. Okay, empathy, connecting, understanding, being inclusive. Who's this part? Is it? Ooh, I lost connection. Can you guys hear me? Because it says I lost connection, but I can see everyone.
I heard you.
We hear you.
Okay. Who's saying this part?
I can
Me.
speak. Oh, you.
Yes.
Go, Nicola. Go, Nicola.
Yeah, I was just so excited. I was looking at the participants, and it's nice to see some of my colleagues here, Tracy and Suk, and I know everyone's always, you know, and especially in these times, I think compassion, care, it's really, you know, people care more about the affective side now. We see how important it is, but also how it needs to be a two-way thing for it to be sustainable. So here are just two quotes, one from Curtin and one from Segal. And just, you know, the compassion is this cultivated feeling of emotion. Curtin says it's how we feel, how we think, how we act together, and that it's a cultivated practice rather than judgment around the world. So it's something that, it's never fixed. It can change over time, and we develop it as we go. And then it's also going beyond feeling and also going beyond an individual. And to really, be compassionate involves understanding the social and political structures of society. And it's and we really like this. It creates urgency for practice, for action, because it's not just about the feeling and keeping it inside, but also acting on it and doing something about it. So that's where our compassionate learning design model comes from. Maha, if you can share the next slide. So we've visualized it as a tree, and we've defined compassion in this way within the context of learning design with 4 dimensions. And this is how we see it interacting: is a desire to create more participative spaces, a recognition of power and our positionality and that of the people we work with, and how this affects our ability to participate, and finally a centering of care and affect in the learning process. So we've got the sunshine, you need this environment is of care. So we see it as an overarching principle, and participation as a process. And sometimes, you think of when you're planting something, it takes time to grow and to develop, particular practices. So again, that cultivated practice. And justice is a desired outcome. So perhaps you start growing a tree and the one year you're not going to get any fruit, or you might not get very many, or they might be small. But that is your end, your goal, right? And it's not that you necessarily always are going to achieve that, but you're striving towards that. So that's how we see this playing out. And Praxis is really on how these intersect. If we can go to the next slide, I think we've got it much better there, those dimensions. Yeah, so it's participation. It's this process, this desire to increase the level of participation of our students. Again, using that, perhaps drawing on that model with the spectrum. Justice is understanding power and history, how it affects our ability to participate, and our positionality and intersectionality, and how it influences our critical pedagogy. Care, that's about the importance of affect and how it impacts learning. And some of you may have come across, humanizing pedagogies as a term, or trauma-informed pedagogies, such as the work of Imad. And we talk more about these in our papers if you want to, especially the hybrid pedagogy one. Many people talk about care, but they're not doing so in a theorized way, or drawing together the work of people like Tronto and Pacanksi-Brock and Imad. Then we've got Praxis. So in these previous dimensions result in this commitment to act and to take responsibility to move towards this more socially just learning design. It's about, again, it's that commitment to action and actually deciding to do something about it. And I think our next slide, yes, this is just a link to our article, but we'll share that with you. And the next one is from
I just want to post the link to our article.
Thank you, Maha.
I've done that.
Oh, you've already done that. Thank you, Daniela.
Oh, goody. Yes,
Great
definitely.
minds.
So Tracy said, I think you summarized it nicely: reflexivity, understanding how who you are affects the learning experience for others. Yeah. And sometimes that care it might be in that kind of where you do something for people, and that care can be parochial or condescending. It might not necessarily, you have good intentions, but because you don't understand the people enough, that it might not be what they need, or they don't see that as care. So that's where, again, where co-design and is really important, and co-creation is of the curriculum has come up a lot. There's a lot of work in this area that's fairly recent, and it's about the process of student engagement where students and staff, teachers, lecturers, become partners, each with a voice and a stake in curriculum development. And there are quite a couple of other authors who also talk about this. And I think we're seeing it, especially in South Africa, we're seeing the student as partner kind of discourse quite a bit at the moment. Okay, so we've got our Slido, but I think this is one we're going to chat to. Daniela, Maha, or are we skipping past that one? I'm looking at our slides and I see a Slido, but I might be wrong.
Oh, really? I'm seeing something. I'm seeing a blank screen. If you can see a Slido, tell me what's in it.
Okay, so the Slido says, what are some of your, I'm going to copy it to the chat. What are some of the ways your learners or students participate in the design of their own learning?
Oh, wow. I can see nothing. Maybe we can take it in the chat then. I can see it. So weird.
So is your next one the spectrum with the who decides what actions? Okay.
Yeah, that's okay. There's a blank screen. That's probably the Slido you're seeing.
Okay.
It's okay.
So if you want to take the mic, you can type M, or you can share the your response in the chat. If you're interested in this topic, I'm sure some of you have already done some co-design work with students. And how do you let students, are there things that you've let students decide about?
I can share one as an example to get people going. So one of the things my students do in my class is they develop games. And so first I expose them to a lot of games that already exist out there that are similar to the kinds of things we're going to design. But then I don't tell them what the assessment criteria are for their game. I ask them to develop their own assessment criteria before they start developing their own games, and then they decide what a good game should look like. And every semester it's slightly different, and then they develop their games and try to meet the criteria that they decided for themselves. So I guess that's on the scale, maybe a with or a by, because they get to decide a little bit.
And I think Tracy's one is sort of similar. Maybe you want to take the mic and tell us a bit more, Tracy.
Hi, Nicola. Hi, everyone. I'm a little bit embarrassed because I don't think that they've actually, I don't think I've really incorporated them much. It's very limited. But if I have had an honors class, for example, and we've decided on the kind of focus areas for the course, very often they have sourced the readings that they thought were most relevant or spoke to them or that they enjoyed, and we've put that onto the reading list. And then also sometimes I have asked them to design rubrics for the class presentations or something like that. But I mean, I'm here today because I really want to learn more about how to incorporate this. Thanks.
Yeah. You shouldn't be embarrassed, Tracy, because I think it's really hard to involve students. And a lot of times you can do something really empathetic and helpful without involving them. And we do this all the time. I think it's just recognizing that that's not the maximum that we can do, and that what might we be missing, especially if we belong to the dominant majority and some of our students are minorities. We may not be able to just imagine what it is they want. But I think you're already doing a lot. Like, some people don't give students which readings to focus on, don't allow them to bring up their own. You're already doing quite a lot. So Alia also has something. Preferred tool for creating a thing. Yeah, like how. They can decide the how, not just the what, right? And choices on how they choose to present and do some of their assignments. So that's great, Alia. Because if the key thing is to have them express, then allowing them to express in the way that they prefer is always is a good thing to do.
And sometimes people don't have, just to an idea, sometimes people don't have the tools or the skills in using that tool to enable that expression. So make a video, or, you know, you might want to, it depends on how important that is for that particular subject or activity. So that's also just something to be conscious of.
I've been
Thanks,
thinking
Alia.
a lot because we are teaching this postgraduate course in blended and online course design, and our participants are extremely busy. And we decided to never give points for participation because, you know, we have two weekly meetings, design workshops with them. And we didn't intentionally not give points because we thought these are busy people. If they can't come, it doesn't matter. They can always listen to the recording. But now in hindsight, because I see how difficult it is for them to complete all the weekly activities and assignments, and I'm thinking just the ability to come for those 2 hours twice a week is actually a lot. And we should, in some way or the other, for those who want to, be able to recognize the time that they spend in the workshops and the way they engage in the workshops. So for next year, I've been thinking that maybe we can, the 40% formative assessment, we could ask students or participants to put a weight to where they want the most points to go to, you know, would it be participation? Would it be the reflective essay? Would it be the design tasks?
Right.
You know,
and different participants can choose different things, right?
Exactly. So they still have to do everything, but we could just, you know, done, tick box. They've done 8 reflections, they've done 8 design tasks, but they could say they have extra 10 points that we could allocate to one of the 3 areas and then mark them on the quality of participation, for example, quality of submission, depending on where they are, you know, where they see that.
And I think what's cool about that program is that it's a small number of people. Whereas
Adriano is talking about 500.
So Adriana is talking about 500 students, you know, getting engagement and collaboration becomes very tough to implement. Trying to use anonymous peer-to-peer discussions and also using Google Docs, group work, or reflective journals. Yeah, I think this kind of how do you do compassionate design for large classes is definitely challenging.
I think Adrienne Marie Brown is onto something with the emergent strategy concept. So one of the things, so I love this example of, I think it's the larks. It's a kind of bird. Okay, so the birds, you know, when birds fly together and they're in like a V shape. And when you look at them, they all follow each other and they're like many, many, many birds. But it turns out that the birds aren't all following one leader. Each bird is actually aware of the 6 or 7 neighboring birds, and they just adjust themselves according to those 6 or 7. So it's, to me, it's like a model of distributed care. And it's like every one student is responsible for 6 or 7 others, not for all 500. And then in terms of the teacher distributing care, the teacher cannot possibly care for 500 people in the same way. But if the students are caring for each other, if you have a lot of teaching assistants, it would help. But obviously, I don't think that's the case. But if the students can care for each other and support each other, then the collaboration becomes between the 6 or 7 students and not between the 500. I wouldn't ask 500 people to do one group discussion or work together on one Google Doc, right? But if you have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, that's manageable. That's a manageable amount, I think, to think about, and to you won't be able to monitor as the teacher, but maybe letting go of monitoring as the key thing, and control. Because I think sometimes when we have large numbers, we think about control. When we have small numbers, we feel it's okay because we can see what's happening and we'll be able to catch things. But if we have the students develop together their ways of working together, then they can work at the 6 or 7 as if they are a small class between themselves, if that makes sense.
So it's that finding, which just linking to a previous sort of issue that came up, was about finding those spaces for agency within these big structures. And sometimes we think, oh, well, I can't do anything. But finding those little nuggets, and, you know, in this case, like Maha's got a good idea here. I mean, it's about scaffolding that redistributive care for students. And yeah, I think that sounds, you know, really useful, a good place to start, but there's always a place to start. And going back to the emergent strategy, she's got that nice quote about going from the instrumental to the monumental. So sort of like, what do you do next? And it's, you know, you start small, and sometimes a small thing can have a very big impact.
Any other comments, suggestions, sharing? Difficult with first years, you don't know them, they're still trying to find themselves. That's true. They need a lot more adult mentorship because they're still not ready necessarily to mentor each other. I hear that. I think that's one of the situations where they should, it's one of the problems in a lot of institutions, but when they're younger is when they need more individual attention. Like when they're older, they're more independent. Why do they put them in these huge classes where they get lost? And I was listening recently to a university in India, or I think it's the whole system in a certain city in India. But anyway, what they have is, first of all, to enable equity, they have sort of percentages for different like classes and minority groups to make sure that you get enough of them. And so there are certain minority groups that are allowed in at a lower cutoff point than the people who are in the dominant and privileged groups so that they can get into university. And then they provide mentorship, small mentorship groups from second year or third year students to the first year students for everyone. And so even if they're in a large class for their actual teaching and their classes, they do have support of a mentor who is someone who's a year or two older than them. And that person is responsible for like 2 or 3. So a little bit kind of like that distributed care that we were talking about with the birds. And so, I mean, there has to be some place where they can get that individual attention, even if it's not going to come from the teacher and in the classes. And I wonder if that model could work elsewhere, especially that it's students to students. So it's not, again, asking the university to hire more teachers because we know that they're not going to do that. Yeah, I hear you on that as well. I think in the UK, sometimes they have something called a foundation year, which I think helps with that. I'm not sure if everyone has to take it. I think it depends on how well you've been prepared in school, but yeah. There should definitely be those things happening to help them be students and to be independent and autonomous learners. All right, I'm gonna share a screen and show this, and I'm not gonna over talk it. You can always look at it more in your own time. But sort of trying to give examples of institutional conditions that make it difficult to, under which conditions would you be able to do each of these? And so, the 2 where the educator is the one that does the decisions and the approvals and so on. This is when your institution has a lot of requirements and accreditation requirements and things like unified assessments. Sometimes if you have like multi-section courses where lots of different people are teaching the same course, then everybody does the same exam at the end. There's not a lot of leeway you have about what you're going to do with the exam, right? And then as you get a little bit more freedom, you can do a lot more. So we were thinking, the most freedom is when it's something outside of the curriculum and the students can do whatever they want. They don't even need educator approval at any point. And then in the middle, in the width, you've got a little bit of flexibility. And so you can do things where you take some decisions together and you co-design the process. But then in the end, the teacher, for example, is still giving a grade and deciding who passes and who doesn't. As long as there's a point where the educator is going to decide a grade you're never going to reach that as. It has to be completely outside of the teacher's hands to reach that complete level of freedom. And so it's not to say that we seek that level of freedom in every single educational context. It's just to recognize that there is a level of freedom above what we normally offer. And to figure out, like Nicola said, like where within our institutions are there pockets for some agency, for some parts of what we do. Is this Daniela or Nicola? I can't remember. Oops, I didn't mean to stop sharing. All right.
I think that is me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so our second dimension of the participation, and these dimensions are intersecting, so justice and participation also intersect, is justice. And the justice, as we mentioned before, is the understanding of power and history and how that affects our ability to participate. So it's about understanding that even if we want everybody to participate, we want our students to participate, but you've already mentioned some reasons why they can't, whether it's large class sizes, or it's, maturity levels, or maybe it's experiences, previous experiences of education, it's cultural, it's language, it's gender. It's, so in some cultures, women are not allowed to participate or should not be seen to be participating. So it's being aware of who is in our room and what might stand in the way of their participation, and to try and create spaces that would allow, the most possible participation. And that also involves having conversation with students why we think it's important for them to participate, because they might, they might see, they might come with expectations of being taught. And if you don't teach, but step back and say, students, you have to, you have to do your own work, you have to co-create your knowledge, then it might be seen as bad teaching, or, this is not what we came to, to the university for. So justice is all about understanding who is in your room, what and how can you create a space of belonging for everyone. I want to move to the next.
Is that a Slido? Because I can't see it.
Yeah, how strange. So the next slide is the next question that we ask is, what are some of the inequalities that exist in your classroom? This was a multiple choice question. Huh?
Yeah, but I guess it's okay. Let's ask people what inequalities. Yeah.
What do you think stands in the way of participation in your classrooms?
Language, Adriana says. Adriana, what's your context? Your name looks Italian, but I don't know. So when you say language, I don't know. Which one?
It is Italian, but I'm born and bred in South Africa. But language is one of the big issues, especially from the diversity of environments and individuals that come into the university space. They generally, don't have, they come from, other isiZulu or Sotho or backgrounds, and mostly at home they speak that. So then when they come into an English university environment with academic terminologies and all that, they battle as well.
Right.
So to actually understand.
Yeah. So there's language, and then there's the cultural capital of lack of familiarity with jargon and academic language, right?
Yeah.
Another layer.
And that's the problem. It's also trying to translate it to help students when you actually do the accessibility and all stuff like that. And UDL is how do you translate some of the academic lingo and make it relevant or understandable in another language? So like I know with sign language, when I work with the disability rights unit as well, that's one of the things that they battle with as well, on sign language.
Yeah, thank you for that. And actually, interestingly, a couple of people have been talking about students with disabilities as, again, some of those that face some equity issues in the classroom as well. There's also Vicky talking about other commitments like jobs and caring. And that's an economic, right? It's partly an economic limitation, but they have to work and then that takes away from their ability to, and the time that they have to focus on the course. A couple of people talked about technology, and that could be, I guess, access to good internet, or just their digital literacies, or access to the right devices or the quality of devices, right? There's all of that. And that's, again, often economic, but not always. Shall I share again?
So this is just, again, our examples of how we can see justice across this continuum of participation. So how participation and justice intersects. If we do justice to somebody, that would be doing justice with very little reflection on how power and hierarchies play out in class. If we do justice for somebody, then there is some reflection as an educator responds to learners' feedback, for example, at least keeps, has some sort of awareness of who is in the room and tries to accommodate them. The width and the bar would be when there is more reflection upon hierarchies and how this affects the collaboration. And there's conversations with learners about that. So you're involving your learners into the conversation on on what stands in the way, and you take some consideration or some suggestions from learners about how to respond to what stands in their way to participation. And the bar would then be, to ask students to lead the process and to be there to facilitate it, and to have students suggest what they want to do. And as a lecturer, you listen and you follow. The as would be students creating their own spaces and their own, and being responsible to manage how power dynamics affect the relationship among themselves. And then finally, I'm not sure who is taking over. Is it Maha?
I could talk about this. So we're building a little bit on work that Mia Zamora and I worked on in terms of the intersections between equity and care. So we're not just talking about, oh, we're going to care about social justice separately from the participation, separately from the caring. Is that, first of all, there's Nancy Fraser's model of parity of participation. So she talks about the different dimensions of social justice, and then she talks about the importance, like the pinnacle of doing justice is not just to include people, but to make sure that everyone is equally able to participate and take decisions. Joan Tronto has her model where she calls it democratic care, because care can be done in ways that are autocratic or paternalistic, right? And Mia Zamora and I call it socially just care, because we're talking about how do you distribute care so that nobody is giving all the care to all the people and being burned out by that, and nobody is receiving care while others are not we don't have a situation where some people receive care and others don't. It's about how do we distribute the care to make sure that it's part of everyone. And so it's a participatory sort of understanding of care, which is a little bit similar to what I was trying to suggest to Adriana when you have large numbers of students, and how do you do that? How do you do it in a larger context? And so even when you're trying to care for your students, right? Sometimes you can decide what they want and how I anticipate that my students are going to be unhappy because they have exams these days, therefore I will do this for them. Sometimes things like give them a flexible deadline. But that's an assumption on our part, right? Another thing would be that the educator would survey the learners and ask them, would you like to change the deadline of the assignment, or would you like to cancel the assignment, for example? But if we do with, then it's more of an open discussion, and the care receivers, the students, can share what they think their needs are and what their rights are, and they can decide what kind of options they'd like to be available to them. And we may not have to impose the same option on all of them. And then the buy would be if the students themselves are the ones who establish, these are the things that we want the teachers to do in order to show care for us and to help us, and to like integrate things like trauma integration into the curriculum and trauma-informed approaches to teaching. And then if it was on the as level of participation, then the learners themselves would do all of that without the teacher having to approve, how they want things to be done for themselves. So I'm seeing people talking about UDL here. Is justice synonymous to equity and/or equality? If not, in what way is it different? That's a great question. So equality and equity are not the same, because equality is about treating everyone the same way, and equity is about making sure everyone reaches the same outcome, which may need you to treat them differently. And I think all of us in the classroom know that not every student needs the same amount of care and way to be treated in order to succeed. And so, equity means if someone has a disability, that we support them differently. And social justice, I would say it's just a bigger term than equity, but sometimes I use justice and equity synonymously, but it shouldn't be, because I think social justice incorporates a lot of different elements, right? And then UDL, Nicola's talking about UDL, Universal Design for Learning, in case someone doesn't know what that is. And they need to be broader than Universal Design for Learning. I think Universal Design for Learning aims to create some kind of equity, but it's not, I think, enough. And it was originally made for people with disabilities, for sure. And they now started to create like anti-racist approaches to UDL and things like that. Adriana was talking about inclusive education as an umbrella term, and UDL as a framework in which you can you can take action to a point, not necessarily everything, but yeah, empathy and compassion would come in, right? And then careful about how you define inclusivity, and back to this point about parity of participation from Nancy Fraser, is that when you say inclusive, doesn't just mean invite someone in to the space and keep the space just as it has always been with the dominant groups, because otherwise, back to the point that Daniela is talking about, yeah, inclusion is often used in terms of assimilating the marginalized into the same thing that the dominant groups have, and that they will fit in and just start using it. So Irene had a great meme using dancing as a metaphor. Oh yeah, I know that one. Irene, do you have it with you? I know that model. I think it was missing something. Remember when we saw it? It was like there was a belonging part where you dance like nobody's watching, and I was like, but if you belong, you should feel fine dancing with other people.
I found it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me stop sharing the screen and pin you or something so everyone can
No,
see
it
it.
says diversity, being invited to the party.
Show us.
Accessibility, getting access to the dance floor. Inclusion, being asked to dance. And belonging, dancing like no one is watching.
Show it to us real quick. I made you like the center so everybody should be able to see it a lot easier.
I suppose it won't mirror.
Yeah, I can see it well now on my side. It mirrors it
Okay.
okay on the other side. Okay, thanks.
So I guess we'll have to, what is equity and what would, maybe you get to choose what dance style or what, what music is played.
Yeah, that's a good point. They forgot to talk about the music altogether, right?
Yeah.
The volume even of the music. Oh my God. Okay, this is another Slido that I cannot see. What does it say? I think it's about whether care can backfire.
Yeah, what can go wrong?
Yeah, what can go wrong if we offer care without asking the person who's receiving the care, without involving them? I think some of the really good examples of this are in how we care for the elderly. Does anyone have examples of this, of when you offer care but you don't involve the people who are receiving it?
The little things, like I spoke with a colleague of mine who is really interested in disability and how to support students on the LMS that have disabilities, and she's a deaf student, and he kept getting, the help desk kept calling him rather than sending an email. So they kept calling, he kept sending an email and saying, I'm not getting any support, and they're like, yeah, but we call you, and he's like, but I'm deaf.
Oh my God, like totally, they are tone deaf. Oh my God. Yeah. You're just offering this the way you do it, and you're not recognizing what the other person needs and how they want to do
I got really upset. I kept saying, but we kept trying to call you. We kept call you. And he's like, but I'm deaf.
Adriana is saying marginalization and feeling inadequate could happen, yeah. And feeling rejected. Yeah, sometimes your attempt to help someone can make them feel like they're incapable, and that's not how they want to feel.
And sometimes when you ask people why they don't like a certain thing, they can have very, very good reasons. So I'm thinking about a colleague who wanted students to do videos and translate concepts and do these educational videos, and it was around HIV, and they said, do it in the local language. They said no, but directly translating some of these processes and how does it happen that you pick up this virus, and there's stigma associated with those words, so they actually prefer English. So it's actually it's really important, rather than deciding on what are the terms and saying to students, we'll do it in this language, they might have reasons why they might not want to.
Yeah, that was interesting. We in our work with multilingual glossaries, we started first with professional translators translating these terms in different languages, and it didn't work because the students just didn't understand, because they used such a high level language that's not spoken or not used in the in their local language. So it didn't help them in any way. And then we went and we got students to translate those terminologies with the lecturers in collaboration, but in terms and words that were actually used and spoken and translated into the everyday practice of the students.
Adriano, your hand's up. Go ahead. Persons with disabilities, Nicola. PWDs is persons with disabilities.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Adriano.
Sorry, I was busy typing. There was a story that I actually, when I was working with HIPSA nursing courses efforts, the one nurse actually says that this one old man came into the hospital dressed like he was going to church and all that, and because of some of the nurses actually learned had to learn languages and different types, so they were actually greeted in their language, and this guy was like non-responsive and he didn't want to speak to them. And then the more senior nurses actually went to him and spoke to him in English, and he was a lot more responsive and a lot more happy, because for him, when he went to the hospital, that was actually, he wanted to be treated like an important person in a sense, because if you say sir and how are you and all that, then he actually feels like how he dressed up. So there was this misunderstanding there, and that's the kind of like scenario that you actually have to take, and you actually have to be experienced to actually negotiate and understand. And also the fact that the senior nurse took the agency to actually go up to him and find out exactly how he wants to be addressed in that. So yeah, that's the one scenario that I've actually learned. But then also what I found, another point is that I was typing, the biggest problem at universities and all that, when I was speaking to the disability rights unit, is that this is it's a fraction of students that actually have the agency to come up and highlight their disabilities. And that's one of the biggest problems, because when designing courses and all that, a lot of lecturers just design for visual and hearing and stuff like that, and they don't really design for or want to add in, because they see it as an extra step, or it's an extra load to the work, adding transcripts, stuff like that. And also when they do presentations, being more descriptive, like explaining the pictures and all that. And that's where a lot of students come, like battle, especially in the first 3 years of their studies. And also, yeah, there's another point on that, where students, like with the DRU, the Disability Rights Unit, is that lecturers don't give in work early enough. And it takes them like 2 months or something like that just to translate or get the work, coursework, into a format that is applicable for each disability. So for 2 or 3 months, the student actually doesn't have work. They don't actually have context. And that's what we actually have to start looking at changing in that, where I say it's a lens that we actually have to use in the institution.
Yeah, this is also another one of the things that Mia Zamora and I were talking about when we talk about distributed care. You need a system that supports this kind of thing, so that first of all, teachers know ahead of time how to create their things in an accessible manner, and they know how to get the support of a disability services unit that can help make things more accessible. So for example, I have a blind student, and if he gets my slides early enough, he can convert it to Braille, or he can read it on his own on his screen reader or whatever. But I don't usually send my slides a week ahead of time, right? So these are little things that, and one of the other things is, like, if you know you're going to have a blind student 3 months ahead of time, you have a lot of time to make all those changes. But when you don't, and then you're in a situation where you're having to do things that you were never doing before, and if you weren't doing them by default, right? All of these things come into play, but it needs systems of care. So that not individual teachers are putting in a lot of effort, and then other teachers aren't having to do any effort, right? Becomes an issue. One of the other things, like when we're talking about persons with disabilities, is that that thing about how they want to be named. you know, a lot of people who are born blind, they want to be called blind. They don't want to be called visually impaired. That's a lot of different people are visually impaired on a scale, but they want it to be clear, I was born blind. I do not see at all. I have never seen. So you talk to them, and the kind of support they need is different from someone who's only been blind for a few years, and they know what you mean about other things. And so it's important to recognize as individuals, not just as groups. All right, we're almost done, right? So this is again Jane Tronto, and just talking about this paternalistic care where you assume you know better than the person you're caring for, or parochial care that goes for certain groups but not others. Daniela, is this you?
Yeah, this is just to kind of bring all of the dimensions of our model together. So what we are hoping that if we are intentional about participation as much as we can, understanding the constraints that we have in our context, and if we're intentional about justice, and if we're intentional about care, so if we are intentionally designing for participation, justice, and care, we would reach what Fraser, calls a praxis, where the theory, the action, the reflection come together into, something that can transform our practice and our context and lead us towards more socially just learning designs. And these are just some examples across, again, our continuum of participation from to to as. And I'm not sure we have to go through each and every one. We brought a lot of, I think we already saw a lot of examples.
Yeah, I want to leave room for questions as well, I guess.
So for us, this is Sean Morris, one of the hybrid pedagogy people. And this is a quote of one of his books. He's very interested in disability and how to design compassionate and socially just for learners with disability. And this is a quote that I really love because it speaks so well what we also believe, that design is not, you don't do design and then it's done. It's a living practice. It's something we can get better at. It's something that we can build relationship with between ourselves and those who either will benefit or be harmed by our designs. I think this is really so important reminder, any design decision we take can either benefit or harm some of our students, and not everyone. Again, our students are so diverse. We need to understand that what can benefit some might not benefit all. So it's iterative. It's something that we have to keep getting better at. It's a praxis, a process of doing, examining, reflecting, doing, and never getting so set in our ways, that we forget there are always new things to try. And I think this is where we have reached, with our model. It's something that we have to just get better at. It's not an easy task to design in compassionate ways. It's not a familiar task. It means to change a lot of practices in our departments. It might mean, to ask for research funding to set up a course design project that's intentionally designed to involve students and other stakeholders. But it's something we want to try, and we want to encourage people to just get into and start thinking about. How do you?
There must have been a Slido, but I don't know what was on it.
I can tell you what the question was. About, one thing that you will take away from our session today.
Okay, yeah.
Let me put that in the chat.
Okay.
So from everything that we have shared today, and I am aware it's a lot, quite difficult concepts to engage with, but is there anything that, that caught your attention, that you said, okay, this is something I'm going to try out? Or at least I'm going to think about, I'm going to talk to my colleagues about. I don't have much experience with game-based learnings. Do you have, Maha? Adriano is asking if we have any.
I have a little bit. Advice or articles. I don't read about it a lot, but Adriano, if you want to email me later, I'm going to put my email here.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Let me know more about what you want, because I've worked on this a little bit and I still do a little bit. So
Yeah, no, my thing is like, because working with the interactivity and all that at the institution, I find that I always have to be considerate about if I make the character a certain color or a certain race, or you know,
yeah, sure.
who am I marginalizing? Who am I going to affect? Also, how are they represented? And then also, especially with the nursing and the medical thing, it's like, how do I convey it to them? How do I what the actions mean? How do they speak without being
I actually have a really easy answer for you. Design it with the people at the margins. Involve the people at the margins in the design from the very beginning, not at the very end just to test it, but from the very beginning of conceptualizing what you're trying to do. Ask them how they want to be represented, and have a group of them, not a token one person who's your advisor, but involve a lot of them early on in the process. So they're not going to design the actual game, but they can be involved in the design from the very, very, very beginning and throughout the process, and get their feedback throughout the process. But Nicola also has a name for you.
It's a small
supervisor already.
He knows her, yeah.
Yeah, I studied, she was like, I think 2 years or 3 years ahead of me. So yeah, I think she was master's when I was doing my first or second year. So
okay, because
I know
checked
her
out
from
her staff profile now, and apparently her current research investigates pedagogic frameworks for teaching programming in South African context, with a focus on decolonization and curriculum transformation. So I think you could have some interesting conversations.
Yeah, no, I know that also she is a bit unfamiliar with the actual serious games and game-based learning within education. I know she actually creates a different way of doing, because I actually was a tutor on one of the courses that they do for web-based, for the honors web course. And it is a nice process and all that. But I know that, we've actually have spoken quite a bit. But there was another lecturer that was at WITS that specialized it, but she actually left the institution, so I don't speak to her. And she actually came from Europe and specialized in games for a purpose instead of serious games. So yeah, and it's hard. It's not really written about. There's a lot of like people that actually they talk about it. They create ideas, but it's not. There's no like foolproof or way to actually integrate it. But then I understand, because my master started off with critical diversity and making a serious game, and my head blew because of all the things that I actually had to
consider,
contextualize and add in and think about. And I'm a white male
because of your positionality.
So how do I actually tell people or try change their points of view on others, whereas I'm coming from a different background? So it just blew my mind that it's so complex.
You can do this without a co-creation process. There's no way with participation. I've got one of my master students developed mobile games for small preschool kids, but she used an interesting process of co-design, because she built it for different cultural spaces to see how that would work. So she used different churches in Cape Town that had very different audiences or target groups. Was very interesting what she came up with, to create one game that would be acceptable in these different spaces. I can give you her name. But we have some lovely comments here about, what people take away. Irene says she was like a sponge and she will use some of what's presented in a course that she's putting together. And Ralitza says the need to constantly keep working on the design process for learning. It never ends. No. And Tracy to think about how the design of my course can harm some of the participants, finding them out what students have identified as theirs. We have one of our colleagues, I love that example, Nadine. She said when she taught in secondary school, she used to ask her students on day one, what does she need? What does she need? Because she's so differently positioned to them as a white middle-class woman coming into a disadvantaged community and teaching there. She's like, I cannot understand what you need from me. So write me some letters, write me a letter, each of you, and tell me what you think I need to know to best support you. I found that so lovely as an idea, you know, to just from the beginning say, I can't understand how to care for you unless you tell me. So tell me whatever you want to disclose. Don't tell me what you don't want to disclose, but whatever you can share with me, share with me.
Yeah, Maha says she's got to go. Thank you so much, Maha. It was lovely facilitating with you.
As always. Bye. Thank you.
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I think we've reached the end of our session anyway. Thank you for those who have stayed with us for more than usual, an hour and a half. I know that's a lot to take out of your day. The slide, Tracy, let's share. Yeah, we shared them before, we'll share them again. I've put them in the chat. And you have all our contact details there as well if you want to get in touch and continue the conversation. And thanks again, Jakob. You've been very quiet today, and Irene invite us to the session. It was lovely.
And the links to our papers are also on the event page. And yes, Irene, very important. Please share some feedback with us about the session. There are, I think, only like 5 questions or something. But I know the Emerge Africa team really appreciates it.
Yes, we do. Oh, thank you so much, Daniela, Nicola, and Maha. I have no words, so I'll just say thank you. And let's do this again. I really, you know, it was really nice. Yeah. We appreciate your time and everything that you do. And also thank you everybody who made time to join us today. And we'll keep on letting you know about the other activities that are happening. Yeah. So have a great day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you, and bye for now. Yeah.
Go well, everyone.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.